The night air over Rome was heavy with tension. Somewhere in the twisting alleys near the Forum, a man screamed and then fell silent. By dawn, the body of a senator was discovered slumped against a marble column, his throat cut so cleanly it seemed the work of a surgeon. A letter was found near his hand, a confession of treason hastily scrawled. But the ink was wrong, the words too careful, and everyone who mattered in the city knew the truth. Rome had witnessed another assassination. The Senate whispered of secret blades in the dark, of men who killed for gold or for politics, of a brotherhood that served no god but power itself. This was the world the late Republic had become, brilliant, violent, and rotting from within. Decades of civil war had transformed the city once ruled by laws into one ruled by fear. The old ideals of honor and service had been buried under piles of corpses, and the Forum, once the beating heart of the Republic, had become a stage for vengeance. Sulla's bloody prescriptions had set the precedent. Anyone could die at dawn if their name appeared on the list by nightfall. Heads of the condemned were nailed to the rostra, their estates seized, their families ruined. Rome learned that terror was efficient, and those who survived learned to use it as a weapon. Out of this culture of sanctioned murder grew something darker. Behind every senator's guarded smile might stand a man with a dagger hidden under his cloak, loyal to no one but whoever paid him next. These assassins were not mythical ghosts. They were veterans, slaves, freedmen, and soldiers trained in the art of silent death. They thrived in a city that rewarded treachery as a form of survival. When the Republic collapsed into chaos between Marius and Sulla, and later between Caesar and Pompey, these killers found themselves in constant demand. A whispered name could end a career. A single blade, slipped between the ribs in a crowded bathhouse, could change the fate of the state. In such a city, trust itself became a liability. Senators no longer dined without guards. Ambitious generals, from Crassus to Caesar, surrounded themselves with loyal bodyguards who were just as capable of assassination as they were of protection. The line between soldier and murderer blurred. Assassination became an instrument of politics, efficient, deniable, and terrifying. It was not the work of cowards, but of pragmatists who understood that Rome's vast machine of power was fueled by fear. The Brotherhood that emerged in this environment was not a formal order, but a silent network bound by survival and gold. They learned to move unseen through Rome's labyrinth of alleys, to strike at men whose homes were fortresses and whose guards were bribed as easily as they breathed. They studied their prey, their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. Some were soldiers who had learned precision from the battlefield. Others were slaves who had turned the tools of labor into weapons. Together, they formed the invisible hand that steered Rome's destiny from the shadows. The people feared them, yet depended on them. Senators hired assassins to kill rivals and then denounced assassination as a moral plague. The hypocrisy of the Republic ran as deep as its corruption. Cicero thundered in the Senate about virtue and law, yet even he knew that words were powerless against a blade in the dark. By the time Julius Caesar marched across the Rubicon, the Republic had already been hollowed out by decades of secret killings and revenge plots. But there was a strange fascination too, a grim respect for those who mastered death so completely. Roman society, obsessed with spectacle, treated assassination as a form of theater. The method of killing mattered. A public poisoning at a banquet carried a different message than a dagger in a private chamber. Each death was a signal, to allies, to enemies, to the gods. The assassins themselves became part of Rome's mythology, faceless instruments of destiny, feared and indispensable. The moral boundaries that once defined Rome's greatness crumbled in the face of ambition. Every citizen knew that loyalty could be bought, that virtue could be staged, and that at any moment, someone's life might end with a whisper instead of a shout. Rome was not yet an empire, but already its rulers had learned the lesson that would shape centuries of power to come. Sometimes the surest path to control was not through armies, but through silence, secrecy, and a single, well-placed knife. The story of Rome's assassin brotherhood begins here, in the twilight of the Republic, where the streets glistened with ambition and blood in equal measure. It was a time when Rome's greatest men feared not the legions beyond the city walls, but the unseen hands that moved within them. In the shadows of temples and under the arches of triumph, the real wars of the Republic were fought, not with legions, but with blades that left no trace but the echo of fear. Far from the marble splendor of Rome, another empire trembled beneath the same shadow of fear. In the rugged hills and sun-scorched deserts of Judea, the iron grip of Roman rule had crushed a proud people into silence, until silence itself became unbearable. The air was thick with resentment, taxes bled the poor dry, and Roman soldiers patrolled the streets of Jerusalem with the arrogance of conquerors. Yet in the markets, in the temples, and in the narrow stone alleys, a different kind of resistance began to whisper. Men who had lost brothers to crucifixion, mothers to famine, and faith to despair started to carry a new kind of weapon, the sicca, a short, curved dagger designed for one purpose, to kill swiftly and disappear. They called themselves the sicarii, the dagger men. To the Romans, they were terrors. To their followers, they were avengers sent by God. Their rise was not born from greed but from humiliation. Decades of Roman domination had corrupted the priesthood, desecrated the temple, and turned faith into business. Collaborators grew rich under Roman favor, while farmers starved. Every execution, every whipping in the public square, every sneer from a centurion added fuel to the fire. The sicarii emerged as the spark meant to ignite it. They hid in plain sight. Dressed like ordinary pilgrims, they moved among the crowds during festivals, when Jerusalem overflowed with worshippers. At the height of the Passover, when songs of freedom filled the air, a sicarius would step close to a Roman sympathizer, press his shoulder as though greeting a friend, and drive the dagger upward beneath the ribs. The victim would gasp, slump, and vanish into the chaos. By the time the crowd realized what had happened, the killer had melted away. The act was not merely murder. It was theater, a message carved in blood. Rome might control the land, but it could not control the soul. Their methods were terrifyingly effective. A single killing in a marketplace could send waves of panic through the entire city. Merchants closed their stalls, Roman patrols doubled, and suspected collaborators fled to fortified compounds. Fear became the sicarii's true weapon. They did not seek open battle. They waged psychological war, making every Roman official wonder who among the faithful might carry a blade beneath his robe. And when panic spread, the sicarii celebrated, for each tremor of fear weakened the illusion of Roman invincibility. The Brotherhood was not a vast army but a web of small cells, bound by faith, family, and secrecy. Fathers taught sons how to blend into crowds, how to strike without hesitation, how to die rather than betray. Their devotion was fanatical but sincere. They believed they were fulfilling prophecy, purifying Israel through blood. Yet this purity demanded sacrifice. Many sicarii killed friends who collaborated with Rome. Some turned on other Jewish groups they considered too moderate. Their fight was not only against the empire but against compromise itself. In their eyes, half loyalty was treason. Roman authorities responded with predictable brutality. Entire villages suspected of sheltering dagger men were burned. Captured rebels were nailed to crosses lining the roads to Jerusalem. The Romans, masters of terror themselves, understood the power of spectacle, but in doing so, they deepened the very hatred they sought to extinguish. Each crucifixion created more recruits. Each crackdown confirmed the sicarii's message that coexistence with Rome was impossible. The historian Josephus, himself a survivor of these years, described the sicarii with both fear and contempt. He called them brigands, accused them of plunging the nation into ruin. But between his lines lies something more complex, a grudging recognition of their discipline and their courage. Unlike the thieves and bandits who preyed on travelers, the sicarii fought with a purpose. They were born not from greed, but from despair twisted into faith. Their daggers were the last argument of a people who felt abandoned by heaven and by their own leaders. As the movement spread, it began to divide. Some of the sicarii dreamed of a free Judea governed by divine law, others sought only vengeance. Their sanctuaries in the desert hills became places of training and indoctrination. Scouts learned the terrain like a second skin, memorizing escape routes through ravines and caves. Their leaders preached purity and sacrifice, urging them to cleanse the land of impurity, even if it meant turning the blade on their own kin. It was zeal sharpened to the point of madness. To the Romans, they were a nuisance at first, a handful of fanatics striking from the shadows. But by the middle of the 1st century, their actions had begun to shake the entire province. Governors sent desperate reports to Rome of uprisings, assassinations, and rumors of organized rebellion. The sicarii were no longer ghosts. They had become the pulse of a coming storm. And yet, behind their violence, there remained something tragically human. Many were farmers turned killers, young men who had once tended olive groves now stalking Roman officers through Jerusalem streets. They believed they were saving their people, even as their actions invited ruin. Each killing drew Rome's wrath closer, each victory carried the seed of destruction. In the heart of the ancient city, amid prayers and torches, the dagger men prepared for the inevitable reckoning. They had turned fear into faith and blood into language. Their message was simple and terrible: freedom or death. And as the Roman Empire tightened its grip, the sicarii sharpened their blades, ready to carve their defiance into the heart of the empire itself. To understand the sicarii's power, one must understand their craft. They were not mere killers. They were masters of the silent kill, artisans of fear who studied every movement, every heartbeat, every breath before they struck. In a city where Roman soldiers patrolled with armor and swords, the sicarii learned to make invisibility their armor and patience their blade. They could walk through a crowded marketplace, brush shoulders with their target, and leave behind nothing but confusion and a spreading pool of blood. Every assassination was executed with ritual precision, a performance of death meant to terrify as much as to eliminate. The sicca, the curved dagger that gave them their name, was small enough to hide under a cloak but deadly enough to pierce between ribs or under the collarbone. It was designed not for open combat, but for the close, sudden intimacy of murder. Many sicarii trained to move fluidly in crowds, concealing their weapons in the folds of their garments or strapped against the inner thigh, wrapped in cloth so it made no sound. Their attacks often came during religious festivals or large gatherings when thousands thronged the temple. In the chaos of chanting and sacrifice, one man would fall, clutching his stomach, and by the time anyone realized he was dying, the killer had already vanished into the multitude. The artistry of their methods terrified Rome precisely because it defied the empire's logic. Rome was built on spectacle, on legions marching in formation, on public executions meant to awe and subdue. The sicarii offered no such clarity. They struck without warning, without ceremony, without leaving bodies for the Senate to parade as examples. Their violence was intimate and invisible, spreading fear far more effectively than an army ever could. It forced every Roman official, every collaborator, to question whether loyalty to Rome was worth the risk of walking through a crowd. But the dagger was only part of their power. The true weapon of the sicarii was psychology. They understood that terror feeds on imagination. A single killing could echo for months, growing in the retelling. They deliberately chose targets whose deaths would have symbolic weight: tax collectors, priests seen as traitors, or local leaders accused of bowing too deeply to Roman authority. These deaths were not random, they were messages written in flesh. Each victim became a warning that Rome's order could be overturned from within, that no chain of command was safe, that the empire's grip could be severed not by armies, but by one invisible hand in the night. In response, Rome flooded Judea with informants. The alleys of Jerusalem buzzed with spies. Neighbors watched each other with suspicion. Even families were torn apart by fear, fathers wondering if their sons had joined the dagger men, wives terrified that their husbands might be marked for death. The sicarii's genius lay in this contagion of dread. They didn't need to kill every collaborator, only enough to make everyone believe they could be next. The result was paralysis. The machinery of occupation began to stutter, its officials too frightened to act decisively. Yet the same fear that paralyzed Rome slowly poisoned the sicarii from within. Living in constant secrecy took its toll. Many assassins began to lose their grip on reality, haunted by the faces of the men they had killed or the comrades they had betrayed under torture. The line between faith and fanaticism blurred. They began to suspect each other, setting traps for supposed traitors. Their discipline, once their greatest strength, turned inward, devouring itself. In the darkness of their hideouts, they whispered prayers that sounded more like confessions, wondering whether God still walked with men who killed in his name. The historian Josephus describes scenes of almost unbearable tension. He writes of men who sat together at night, eating bread in silence, each wondering if the man beside him had been bribed to strike before dawn. He speaks of secret signals, scratches on walls, coded phrases, the way a cloak was folded, that told initiates when and where to meet. The Sicarii moved like smoke through the city, gathering in the dead of night to plan their next strike. They left no written records, no manifestos, only rumors and corpses. Their very invisibility was their legacy. Even their enemies adopted some of their methods. The Romans began to send their own covert agents into the alleys, disguised as merchants or pilgrims. Assassination had become a language both sides now spoke. The Sicarii had taught Rome something it could never unlearn, that fear was more powerful than force. From this point on, the empire itself would use the assassin's art against its rivals. Still, for all their mastery, the Sicarii could not remain unseen forever. The very terror they inspired began to isolate them from the people they claimed to defend. Ordinary Judeans grew weary of living under both Roman rule and Sicarii revenge. Each new killing drew harsher reprisals, and each reprisal demanded vengeance. The streets became battlegrounds of shadows, where faith, fear, and death intertwined. In the end, their art of the silent kill had achieved more than they could ever have imagined, and less than they had hoped. They had turned assassination into a philosophy, a means of resistance against tyranny. But they had also made their world one where no one, not even the righteous, could sleep without the fear of a blade. As their daggers continued to fall, the Sicarii found themselves at the edge of a transformation. Soon, they would leave the alleys behind and face Rome not as ghosts, but as warriors. The art of the silent kill was about to give birth to open rebellion, and the empire would answer in kind, with fire, legions, and the death of a nation. The Sicarii's war could no longer hide in the shadows. Their daggers had once whispered rebellion, but now they roared. As Judea rose in revolt, the assassins seized Masada, a fortress carved high above the Dead Sea, and transformed it into their sanctuary of defiance. Under Eleazar Benya, they turned from killers into soldiers, swearing to die free rather than live enslaved. Rome answered with vengeance. Legions under Vespasian and Titus crushed city after city, leaving crucified rebels lining the roads. Jerusalem fell in fire, its temple consumed. Yet far in the desert, Masada held out, a symbol of the unbroken will of the dagger men. From its cliffs, the Sicarii watched the horizon shimmer with heat and Roman banners. The 10th Legion encircled the mountain and began its terrible work. Over months, they built an immense ramp of earth and stone, dragging siege engines toward the heavens. The Sicarii could hear the groaning of timber and the clatter of armor growing closer each day. They knew the end had come, but not defeat. When the Romans finally breached the walls, silence greeted them. Inside lay hundreds of bodies, men, women, and children who had chosen death over chains. According to Josephus, Eleazar had urged them to die as free men, slaying their loved ones and themselves before capture. Rome declared victory, but unease lingered. Masada had not fallen to conquest, it had vanished into legend. The Sicarii's final act was not surrender but message, that faith could outlast empire, and that freedom, once awakened, could never be killed by force. Rome believed the Sicarii's death at Masada ended the age of assassins. Instead, their shadow crept into the empire's very core. The lesson of the dagger, that fear governs better than armies, became Rome's own creed. Assassination was no longer rebellion, it was politics. The Praetorian Guard, once sworn to protect emperors, turned into the empire's deadliest brotherhood. They learned what the Sicarii had known. Loyalty was for sale, and power belonged to those who dared to strike first. Caligula fell beneath his own guard's blades. Claudius was poisoned. Nero died by his own hand, surrounded by betrayal. The empire had perfected the Sicarii's art and made it state policy. Senators plotted, generals schemed, and every palace wall hid whispers of conspiracy. Paranoia ruled where law once had. The Sicarii had wanted to destroy Rome. Instead, they taught it to destroy itself. The dagger had simply changed hands. Even emperors lived like hunted men. Domitian lined his palace with mirrors to spot assassins, yet met the same fate, a knife from behind. The empire's strength was now its weakness. It had learned that fear was efficient, but it could not live without it. In trying to crush its enemies, Rome had become them. The dagger was now its symbol, unseen but omnipresent. Power no longer came from the sword or the Senate, but from the silence before a betrayal. The Sicarii were dead, but their spirit ruled the empire that had killed them. The ruins of Masada still rise over the desert, silent and eternal, a monument to the final breath of the Sicarii. Their bodies turned to dust, but their idea endured, the belief that one act of defiance, one blade in the dark, could outlive empires. Centuries later, their spirit resurfaced in Persia's mountain fortresses, in the secretive order of the Hashishin. Like the Sicarii, they struck unseen, believing that a single death could shake the world. From their legend came a word that still echoes: assassin. The legacy of the dagger had crossed ages and continents. Even within Rome's descendants, its ghost persisted. Byzantine plots, Venetian poisonings, medieval intrigues, all followed the same creed: fear rules faster than armies. The Sicarii's lesson had become civilization's hidden inheritance. Yet their legacy is not only blood. It is also a mirror, a question that echoes across time. Were they heroes or fanatics? Liberators or destroyers? They proved that conviction can be both sacred and deadly, that freedom can demand the same cruelty as tyranny. Today, Masada stands as both shrine and warning. The wind that sweeps its stones still carries their message, that even the greatest empire cannot conquer belief. Power fades, monuments crumble, but the will to resist, however doomed, endures. Rome's most feared brotherhood vanished long ago, yet their echo lives in every age where oppression breeds defiance. The empire fell, but the blade remains, a symbol of humanity's oldest truth, that even in darkness, someone will always rise to challenge the mighty and remind them that fear is never eternal.